So on this panel, as much as it says up there, and being able to have my mask on so that I can have different types of masks. I believe that there are different types of masks, like there are different types of musical instruments. So I can have my mumble mask, or I can have my my other mask. So that's pretty much what I'm going to try and do. So when you're looking at CBD and you're looking at all the other different components, this panel is going to be looking at what do you get from the natural plant, and then also what do you get from degradation products, because the plant doesn't synthetically make CBN, for example. It's a degradation product. The plant doesn't take these things and utilize them into formulations. And based on the panel and all the different types of facets that they come into, I think that that's part of the key. So the first thing I want to do is introduce myself. My name's John McKay. I worked, I did my first injection for chromatography in 1972, which means I may have made it. Oh, when did you make yours?
1968.
1968. So usually I'm the oldest guy up here, but you did yours in junior high, so it probably still works out. So when I'm going through that process, it's a matter of some of us older scientists and the younger scientists and where they've been taking these things, so we have a feeling of that. I worked 29 years at a company called Waters Corporation. Another chromatographic sample prep. So what I'd like to do is have each one on the panel just give a short introduction of where you are, what you do. That would be really great. Start from the right to left. You can use or you can use this one, whichever way you want to go.
Hello, so my name is Eric Longo. I'm currently acting CEO of Hemp Select. We're a kind of like a minor cannabinoid company. We specialize currently in cannabigerol, or CBG. We offer a variety of different products. My educational background, I'm not educated necessarily in cannabinoids. That's more of a hobby of mine. I'm actually a data science and mathematics major. But I picked up a lot of information about minors along the way, so I hope I can spread some of this information to the audience today.
A dispensary in Illinois called PDI Medical. I've been very involved in the cannabis industry since 2013, have helped thousands of patients, and in addition, have been a speaker at pharmacy conventions as well. And it's free, it comes out quarterly, and contributed content, and that's it.
Good morning. I'm Alan Robinson. I'm the Executive Director and Chair of the Board for Wisconsin Normal. I'm the co-founder of Herbal Aspect, CBD. We are an online retailer and brand for all things CBD or hemp-derived products. And last year I was named Normal's Most Outstanding Cannabis Advocate of 2020. Since last June, I was hosting a radio show titled WIS Cannabis Radio, where I just kind of introduced the public to both our legislators and kept them informed on the progress of cannabis legislation moving through, or in our case, not moving through our state legislature. I've had some success selling Delta 8, so I've kind of, on an autodidact sort of way, dove into learning about it. I have a background as a pharmaceutical sales rep, so that kind of made it a little bit easy. I'm just here to talk about D8 and all other things cannabis.
My name is Ryan Balone. I'm a commercial director for testing laboratory, KCA Labs, in Kentucky. We specialize mostly in the analysis of minors. We have a couple state contracts, Massachusetts and North Dakota. Do a bunch of state testing for other states that allow farmers to choose which states they would like to send their samples to for analysis. I counted the other day, we have about 38 to 40 cannabinoid and their metabolites standards in-house. So we do a lot of testing beyond just normal HPLC, run a lot of mass spec analysis on cannabinoids and the distillates. So and then also a bit of work on bioavailability of the cannabinoids in animals. So yeah, I also have Dr. Richard Sams here too.
Morning. I'm Rick Sams. I'm the scientific director of KCA Laboratories in Kentucky. My background started in pharmacy. Did those early chromatography experiments in pharmacy school. My professional experience has been primarily associated with colleges of veterinary medicine, where I've taught veterinary pharmacology. I'm interested in pharmacokinetics and analytical methods development and validation. So that's primarily what I do at KCA Laboratories.
So one of the things that when you look, thank you so much. So I had to remember to be, my social skills are limited. And it came with a PhD and I had to give them up. I had a choice that day. They said, would you like to be social or would you like to have a PhD? And I had to think about it. And then I decided on the PhD. So thank you so much. So I think the panelists bring about something that a lot of people aren't truly aware of, and that is it used to be pharmacognosy. Pharmacognosy is the study of natural products, whether it's from plants or from other places, that are now used for medical uses. And then in the late 40s, early 50s, they started to make small molecules. And so pharmacognosy went out of production. I think there's only like 4 or 5 schools now that are left. And it became small molecule. So what we're really talking about is pharmacognosy. And that's the plant with its natural products and how the plant synthesizes those in a very specific way. There's one enantiomer, typically, one stereoisomer that the plant makes specifically. And then you use that plant to be adapted to bioavailability. So when I look at which one we're looking at, and so I would say that the cottage industry, I forget what we call it, legacy. The legacy market in cannabis started off with a land-raised plant that was not high in THC, probably 1 or 2%, and had a lot of the other cannabinoids in it. And then slowly but surely, it became popular to have the THC, so there were people, perhaps Humboldt County, somewhere in California, that might have adapted it over generations to make something higher and higher. And so one of the things I was going to ask the panelists, and that is, on that side, what are you seeing as far as now taking that plant and not genetically modifying it so that it's a GMO, but it's taking and looking at the different parts to make it more amenable to some of the other cannabinoids that are in there. So I would guess even CBG would be one of those.
Right. So what specifically?
So how are you doing? How are you seeing that transition now moving back towards other cannabinoids?
Right. So, as you mentioned, with the breeding techniques that they use to increase in the past the THC levels in plants, they're also doing that with other minors now, CBG being one of them. Now, CBG is very unique in the sense that the acidic precursor to CBG, CBGA, is kind of that parent molecule that he's referring to that most other cannabinoids are subsequently created from, whether it be through synthase pathways or subsequent degradation, those types of processes. But this isn't just being done with CBG. It's also being done with different Varin varieties like CBDV, CBGV, even THCV, and the it really comes down to the genetic or the cultivar companies, as people are becoming more aware of the beneficial effects of these cannabinoids. They're now looking to see which one should we isolate, which one should we start to continue our breeding with, so that we can effectively create plants that are as effective as modern day cannabis strains with THC or modern day hemp strains with CBD.
So anyone else?
As it pertains to breeding for specific phenotypes in regards to Delta 8, I don't see that as a distinct possibility anywhere in the near future. Delta 8 simply exists in the organic plant material in too small of quantities. Attempting to, now I am admittedly a city boy. There's no soil under my nails. I get manicures and pedicures. It's real. So I can't speak to all of the ins and outs of horticulture and or how breeders may attempt to do this. But from what I have heard from my peers and what I have heard from growers themselves, is that it would take too long. It's not realistic. So and as far as Delta 8 is concerned, the other minors, I really, like I said, I'm a city boy, so I don't know.
No, I was just going to mention that, excuse me, even though Ryan said that we have 38 standards for cannabinoids in-house, it's not unusual for a request to come in for one of these new minor cannabinoids, and we can't measure it because we don't have a suitable standard for it. So that's an ongoing problem, and I don't see it ending very soon.
Yeah, that is part of the problem. Some of the things that I've collaborated, just because I came out of Waters, and so therefore, that experience is going back through on the purification. So when there comes something that's now, CBL, or something that's from the other ones, and that is being able to have a purification system to be able to grab enough of it so that you get NMR data, you get enantiomeric excess, and having those other things available. But right now, you're not going to have a lot of laboratories out there that have the purification collection system, having an NMR that goes out, and now you have something that might last 3 days, and then you have to do it again. And so that is part of the problem that we see with this, is that you have those, but how do you have a standard to be able to know how much you have? And that's part of within, for example, CBC A or CBN A. Have you seen any other work that's been done, or anecdotal, even if it's anecdotal, what you've seen with some of those other, what we'll call them minor cannabinoids now? I'm kind of looking towards you because you have so many experiences there.
Yeah. So as far as the in some for acidic precursors, you can get those from any of the cultivated forms of the minor cannabinoids, so long as you're harvesting earlier. So, for example, with the CBG cultivar, if you were to harvest earlier in the season before the plant is fully matured, you would be able to derive mostly the acidic precursor of the CBG molecule. Same goes with if you have a CBD plant cultivar, you would get primarily CBDA in the harvest if you harvested earlier. These acidic precursors also, they are they make up the majority of the final ripened product. It's not until they're actually heated where they become activated into their normal molecule. But aside from CBDA or CBGA, I have seen some mostly synthesized for CBC and CBCA. There are some cultivars that have patents for certain new minors. I know CBC is one of them. Varying varieties for CBD, so CBDV, CBGV, THCV. But outside of the realm of CBD and those acidic precursors along with CBG and Delta 8 and normal Delta 9 THC, there's not a whole lot available currently for growers in the cultivar market.
Joe?
Yeah, and I think just from a practical experience, when you're working with patients and you're seeing products coming in from the growers, there's not a lot. I mean, you can look at the labels, the food labels that are on these products, and you might see THCA, you might see CBN, and when I was working with patients, those products were valuable. CBN for sleep, THCA. We had one dad who had a child who had severe seizure disorder, and the patch of THCA worked very well and didn't give any psychoactivity. So, just from a practical standpoint, and then as I reviewed a lot of these minors, one of the things that was at the end of every explanation of what they are, where they come from, and what they do is we need to do more research. And that's the big issue. I mean, just developing these products, is one thing, but researching and seeing what they do. And I think that's great, but we just have anecdotal information on that, and we don't have any firm studies.
We have seen some scientific evidence that so in formulations, if you include CBDA, theoretically you can include less CBD than an actual just CBD product and have just as much efficacy. Some of the things I've seen on the testing side, like with CBN, for example, affecting sleep, we've seen some evidence of people. I don't want it. I come from dietary supplements, so we would call it adulteration. You don't declare an ingredient on a label. But I've seen some evidence of people including melatonin with their CBN to increase the effectiveness of the purpose of using the material. And I think there's probably some evidence of other nutraceuticals being used in conjunction with cannabinoids to get the desired effects.
Yeah, I think that's a case in point. Do we have some questions from the audience? Yes, sir.
I hear a lot about like synergy between like a lot of different things that your body can absorb it. Is there a synergy between like taking something that's percentage CBG of some sort along with the CBN? Is that like maximize whatever the result, or is it just depend on the individual? Like with vitamins, if you take one vitamin, you get better absorption. If you couple it with something, is that?
And we're waiting for the mail-in.
Right. So as it stands, we were just kind of discussing in the green room the ensemble effect or the entourage effect as it's commonly known. So yes, right, we do know that cannabinoids work better when they're used with other cannabinoids as opposed to as isolates. But to his point, we don't have enough research on exactly how they interact or exactly what better efficacy they give to each other and as far as bioavailability or impact on the endocannabinoid system.
I think one of the ideas related to your question is the inclusion of all the other natural terpenes and flavonoids with cannabinoids. And because we haven't done the science, we don't know why this ensemble effect really works well, but it does.
When it comes to pharmacokinetics in humans, COVID really.
I'll just stop. Can you tell them what pharmacokinetics, and just in case?
Yeah, so it's just when you consume the product, how much the body actually uses and gets the desired effects, as well as what's secreted out of urine and blood and waste to remove the product from your body. But my train of
I'm
thought.
sorry. Yeah, I have a. This is a skill set.
Yeah, it really is.
Next year it'll be a presidential debate that I'll work on that with.
Yeah, so with COVID, we've seen like a lot of universities not doing clinical studies with students. For example, in a normal year, you would have plenty of students to choose from to basically dose with whatever drugs that you'd like to offer them money to consume. A lot of students, obviously, being poor, would take you up on that. Finding some students that don't consume cannabis is the hard part, but that's beside the point. So I think in the last year we haven't really been able to perform the kind of studies that we would have hoped to, and in place of that, we've been a part of several research projects using horses and dogs to try to find the same kind of information and apply it hopefully to the human. It's actually much more expensive to run human trials than with animals, trying to get IRB approval and whatnot. So we've found that the pharmacokinetic studies with animals is preferred at the moment.
Have you found a lot more dogs and horses on campus that haven't used cannabis?
Yeah, we're not allowed to use them if they've used before. So.
Yeah, so it's tough. Yes, sir.
So with these top minors, if you will, there's enough prevalence in the plant to be able to be isolated down and then even have anecdotal ideas of what their health benefits would be. But the other minors, that doesn't sound like we will be able to get that capacity high enough to isolate down. Really, you couldn't isolate and say these have even perceived health benefits until that happens. So even though we might identify tens or hundreds of more minors in the next few years, we can't really attribute anything to those given that concept.
I'll do a quick one. I'll respectfully disagree that that's not possible, and it may just be at this time that they haven't seen anything from those, but to be able to know that you're able to generate that plant to make the synthases to provide those of the natural products, as well as more recent work has been done showing that the terpenes in the different plants are actually stereochemically different. You have alpha and beta pinene, but you have alpha S pinene and alpha R pinene, and you have, the plant actually just goes on its own and will make a different distribution of that. But what do you guys think as far as the other cannabinoids and making those from the natural plant? Are you seeing any work moving forward on ones that we haven't mentioned, like CBL's not up there, for example?
We do whenever certain clients and people in the industry are isolating CBC, we tend to see some CBT as well, and then that kind of leads into more people trying to isolate CBT, and then eventually, hopefully, find the.
Can you tell what CBT and P?
So I mean, it's just another minor. I'm not too privy on what CBT actually would be efficacious for, but if you're talking P, I mean, there's the THCP that many people are aware of, that is supposedly 300 times more.
And is that just the length of the chain in the meta position?
Yes.
Yeah. So you have a 5-chain tail on the THC, and then the P is how many?
I think it's 3, isn't it? It's
3,
purple.
and then you have THCV, which is no, that's 3. So the THCV is 3, and the P is, I thought it's, I'm going to say it was 4 or it was 7. I think it was in between there. I just can't remember off the top of my head either. But it 300 times more bioactive.
It's psychoactive
Yeah.
than THC. So you have a lot of people that are using hemp-derived extracts to synthesize, more of these minors. So yeah, the THCP seems to be a rather dangerous and maybe even costly synthesization process. So I think another side issue would be Delta 10 is being talked about, but supposedly it's just just another byproduct of these processes. Some people say that it's just poorly manufactured D8, but then when we end up testing a lot of D10 or claimed to be D10, it actually ends up just being D8 THC or 6A, 10A. So what we find is, we hope that once something arrives to the lab for testing and it's being called one thing, a lot of it ends up being something completely different, and the testing is showing that.
And and one thing that came out maybe a year or two ago was a study out of Italy. These Italian scientists actually discovered or brought to light THCP and CBDP. And what's interesting is not much was said about CDBP, but THCP, because it has a longer chain, like a 7-carbon chain on the end, it had 30 times the affinity for the cannabinoid receptor, CB1, which just can be actually much more potent than THC itself. And so that's cautionary, but it's also kind of a good thing, because if you can give a much smaller dose of a THCP rather than THC, you can get to some benefits from that.
So there was early work out of Northeastern with Alexandros Makrionas, and he looked at all those chains and such, and so he looked at the length of the chain, and the length of the chain was correlated strongly to the bioavailability as well as the bioactivity. So bioavailability is what can get in, bioactivity is once I'm inside, what kind of havoc can I raise? And so that's the other process.
Yeah, and one simple thing to understand what pharmacokinetics is, in pharmacy school, they just taught us ADME, absorption, distribution, metabolism, and excretion. That's simply what pharmacokinetics is.
So we babble out acronyms as fast as we can. That way we don't have to do anything as much anyhow. The other part that I would, so that was the same part. Where else am I? So when you're looking at the overall molecule, I like to think of it like a bicycle. And I would say that when you're taking that, for example, when you're looking at some of the work out of University of Maryland or stuff that Ethan Russo had done out west and such, and that was the front part of the bicycle in many respects is the terpenes, because they have another effect out of the natural plant, not the added terpenes, for example, just the plant itself. That's the front wheel, and that steers the experience. And the back wheel is the cannabinoids, and that's an amplification or how fast you're going or the other effect that you're doing. So there's a correlation. So as this, we're talking before, there's a lot of work that has to be done that correlates it through different parts. And the other part is personalized medicine. So when we were talking about that, personalized medicine is something that's been out there for a long time, but now it's really coming to light here of, when do you take it? How do you take it? What's its function? Where is it going to go? And so that's the other part. Other questions? There's got to be some. We're not going forward until someone asks a question. I taught college. I know how to do this. I taught pre-meds. They were the hardest.
I just have one more comment about, these minors and what they're good for. You're going to see when you go into, any dispensary in the nation, a big list of all of these cannabinoids and what they do. Now, you can take that as the gospel, or you can take that as, well, okay, maybe it does work for pain or for seizure disorders, for cancer. So you just got to be very careful.
I'd just like to add.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
So like he said, you have to be very careful with the claims on specific cannabinoid effects. But going back to the research aspect of the minors, one great place to look for research on these cannabinoids is a company called Cannabis Pharmaceuticals. They're based out of Israel. And Israel was actually allowed to start doing their research and their trials on these cannabinoids long before the United States or even the United Kingdom were able to do this, because they didn't have the restrictions on the cannabis plant and the compounds associated with it. And something that they're doing currently is they actually have a patent pending type of, I don't know if you would call it, it's like I guess a system where they can do a personalized screening for specific cannabinoids for different cancer ailments. And so that's just one way that they're trying to bring more science towards the individualized patient experience with trying to determine what cannabinoid formulations work best for the individual.
Is that Deddy's work?
I'm not 100% sure.
I think it's Deddy who did that work.
And you know that there's just so many great introductory studies that are out there. I was reading about a flavonoid that's in the cannabis plant that seems to be showing some efficacy towards patients with pancreatic cancer. I mean, how great would that be if they did the research on this flavonoid and came up with a product?
Yes.
Well, I don't have the study in front of me, but if you want to come up to me afterwards, I'll give me your email address. I'll send you that study.
So a good website that I like, and that's semanticsscholar.net. And Paul, the guy out of Microsoft started that one. Paul, what's his last name? Anyhow, it's free, and it only goes through PubMed and the other ones, and it's fast, so you can write pancreatic cancer, cannabis, and you'll have all the PubMed support. semanticsscholar.com. .net.
And you can also Google flavonoid for pancreatic cancer, and it'll pop right up on your computer.
And you'll have some that are open access, so you can have those free, and the other ones will charge you $35 because they're not trademarked, something else. Patent. Okay.
I guess one thing I'll say is that something like Delta 8 or any of these compounds that aren't exactly pure, that end up having many unknowns and isomers that we have yet to identify. I question some of the studies from the past just because of the analytical techniques being used to identify certain cannabinoids that maybe they believed that they were only using Delta 8 to dose subjects and try to find out the effects. But in actuality, there may have been other cannabinoids in there that were affecting the experience or the relief for whichever ailment. So it'd be interesting to see new research conducted on the past research, given the analytical techniques that we're now using to certainly identify what exactly is in these distillates or the plant or whatnot.
So in 1967, was there reverse phase yet, or was it still normal phase?
Well, we had reverse phase, but
We did.
but we didn't have chemically bonded phases. We had to make our own.
Yes. So we are old. And we're still alive.
One more thing I'd like to add, going back to I know this is going back a question or two. someone had asked about the entourage effect, and going back to the cannabis company, they have over 20 years experience in their research and development, and their current leading medication, you would say, for colon cancer is actually a combination cannabinoid drug. So it's a CBC CBG combination drug. It's called RCC33, and they've done human biopsy studies, they've done cell line studies, they've done animal studies, and now they may be the first actually to go into human studies with cannabinoids for specific cancer treatment. So that's something I need to add there.
I would guess the other part too is as you look at the pharmacology and as you look at some of the studies that are being done, you'll see compounds that during those studies are called HU or they're called AM. And who's the fellow out of Clemson that just retired? 2783 or Hebrew University -46, and that's where they've tested some of the cannabinoids, and then they test against synthetic ones and seeing what the activity is one versus another. And so that's how they do some of the pharmacy work. AM is Alexandros Makrionis. He's actually has the patent on spice. He didn't mean it to be the way it was used, but that's how they came across it. But that was used as a template. The other one I would say is we're always talking about the bud, and not that I'm going underground, which is my pun of the next phrase, and that is on the roots, I've found that there's at least 3 triterpenoids that have enormous antifungal work. And some of that work has been done, but on that side, I'm grinding up lots of roots and looking for the triterpenoids. On that side, Ethan Russo, I think, put out a preliminary paper on that one. So there's other things in this plant besides what we're doing on the top side.
One point that I'd like to make is that when you look at all of the drugs that are used in human or veterinary medicine, the cannabinoids are more lipophilic, more fat-soluble, fat-loving than most of the drugs that we use. The fact that they are so fat-soluble means that they are problematic in terms of oral absorption, because for a drug to be absorbed orally, it has to either dissolve in an aqueous phase before it could go through a biological. For all of the cannabinoids if they're going to be administered orally. And so formulation factors can factor into the result that you see.
And if you want to see what that's like, there's a simple experiment you can do at home. Oil and water don't typically mix. So if you take your salad dressing and you shake it up and then it separates again, well, that's the problem that you're seeing. You're taking a compound that goes into your body and goes, I'm sorry, but we're not staying here. We're just going to go out some other exit. And so that's the part that you have when they're trying to modify a compound or modify a way for it to go in. So you can do nanoemulsion. Almost a complete sentence. And so if I go back through and try and complete that thought, so if I go back through, you're trying to make it so it's amenable to be able to get into the body, whether you're doing nano, so it's smaller, but it can't be too small, because then it's like me walking through the room, and it can't be too big that I can't get into the room, so the elephant's in the room, but it can't get out. And so that's what you're seeing, and the way to look at that is look at your French dressing that's got an emulsifier in it, right? Now they stay together. And so that's a tip.
You've got topical, you've got oral, you've got sublingual, but you also have rectal. And in order to get cannabis to be well absorbed rectally, you have to combine the THC and the CBD with a salt called hemisuccinate. And so that actually helps the absorption. You can get up to 30% absorption when that process is done with a cannabis suppository.
I'm so thankful with COVID that we don't have to use rectal thermometers before we are able to come into a room. That's a thought that just passed through my head, which probably should have stayed on the inside, but it's out there. Woo! Yes, sir. You had a question?
Can you talk a little bit about the bioavailability of a product that is utilizing a nanotechnology and one that is not? What are the absorption rates typically for something just with this fat soluble kind of compound, and what is it when it's broken down to smaller particles?
The bioavailability there's substantial published information that show much greater bioavailability after administration of properly formulated nanoemulsions.
University of Maryland has a lot of work done on that one. And then looking at the, it's called the distribution. So you have a size distribution. So you want to make sure you're within a certain range. And I'm Sonomechanics, Alexi, what's his last name? It's Sonomechanics, but Alexi has done a lot of work done on that. He's in the United States. He's down in Florida now, but has done a lot of work on the size and what goes through each part through the pharmaceutical industry.
So is it like 30% is absorbed without nanotechnology and then 75% is with nano?
I don't have the papers in front of me,
Right.
so I don't recall. But there's another important difference, and that is that when you administer a cannabinoid and it goes through the conventional process of dissolution in water and then absorption, those molecules go into the portal system and then they go to the liver before they go anywhere else. And so they are subject to metabolism in the liver before they get to the systemic circulation. And that's called a first pass effect. And the first pass effect eliminates a number of the cannabinoid molecules before they ever get to the systemic circulation. So you have poor solubility limiting absorption, and then you have first pass metabolism limiting the number of those molecules that can get into the systemic circulation. With the nanoemulsions, the cannabinoids are dissolved in very tiny oil droplets. And those droplets get taken up into the lymphatic system. And the lymphatic system bypasses the liver, and the lymph goes into the systemic circulation, bypassing the liver. So you don't get the first pass effect from those nanoemulsions. So there are those two contributions: greater absorption and bypassing the first pass effect in the liver from these nanoemulsions.
So I just got the cutoff. I'm sorry. She just gave me the thing, and if you haven't met Celeste yet, if you go against it, bad things happen. But you're welcome to come up and ask the panelists stuff afterwards. And thank you very much for the panelists, and thank you very much for attending.